All right, we are also live streaming. Hi, Anna, do you want to test your audio?
Yes, thank you. Hi, how's it sound?
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone.
Eric, do you want to test your?
Hi, Anna. Hi, Cindy.
Hi there, you sound great.
Hi, everybody else.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, hello. Howdy.
Cindy, as we get to 6 o'clock, I'll look to you and you can let us know when we're ready to get rolling here.
Perfect. Mr. Mayor, you're ready to begin.
Very good. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is the City of St. Helena regular City Council meeting, Tuesday, June 8th, 2021. And our City Clerk, Cindy Jafopoulos, will get us into helping our community understand the remote access and our Spanish language interpretation.
All right, to participate in public comment by phone, you're going to dial 669-900-6833. At the prompt, you'll enter the meeting ID, which is 811-4885-8436. You'll press pound, and then during public comment, you would hit *9 to speak. Tonight's meeting will have live Spanish interpretation. To access the interpretation, you will need to use the Zoom application from either your cell phone, tablet, or computer. Instructions on how to use the Zoom app are listed in English and Spanish on the agenda posted on the city's website. Once you join the meeting from the Zoom application, you will see a small globe at the bottom or top of the screen. Click on the globe and you will be able to access the live interpretation. Francisco and Claudia are the interpreters this evening.
Thank you. And I've asked our Fire Chief, Chief Sorensen, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
All right, everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hats off. Place your right hand over your chest. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
United States of America.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we'll move on now to our roll call.
Mayor Ellsworth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Here.
Councilmember Hardy,
Here.
Hall,
Here.
Chateau.
Here.
Thank you. And now to our adoption of the agenda. I'll look to the city clerk to see if we have any changes to the agenda this evening.
There are no proposed changes this evening.
Okay, very well. Then I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
And roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Chateau,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the public forum. This is where members of the public are entitled to speak on matters of municipal concern not on the agenda during public forum. Each person's comments shall be limited to 4 minutes. Each person is entitled to speak on any non-agendized item only once at any meeting, and brief questions by council members for clarifications may be posed and answered, and council members may make requests that items be placed on future agendas, but in accordance with state law, no substantive discussion or action may take place unless and until the matter properly appears on the agenda. Is there any public comment at this point?
There is. And the person that's calling in with the last 4 digits of 5662, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and address the council. You have 4 minutes. If you hit *9, *6. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. And I'm going to go to the next person, and then I'll come back to the person ending in 5662. Paige, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and address the council. You have 4 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Council, for listening to me. I made a post last week on Nextdoor and saw quite a string of comments and responses, and it's about the 2 bridges on Pope Street, the 2 bridges, one closer to Silverado, one closer to Main Street. I know that this has been brought up numerous times, so I don't need to get into too many of the particulars because you know the bridges, but when I was driving over the bridge closer to Main Street last week, a car was flying over, went over the middle lane, almost hit us straight on. Luckily, I honked, and luckily I swerved, and you know everybody's fine, and that's all good. And I posted that, and then I saw a string of messages of people really complaining about the bridge closer to Silverado Trail. So moving past all that and all the emotions that came with that, you know, a lot of people said that Caltrans were going to widen or rebuild that bridge. And I understand that the residents of St. Helena downvoted that. And I just wanted to see about the possibility of resuscitating that option and asking the question, were the bridges ever considered being widened while keeping the historic look of the bridges with the stonework, which I think a lot of people really like, versus making it look like a real inner city bridge. So I just want to know if there's any possibility of revisiting that, and have the bridges been checked for safety in any kind of recent amount of time, last year or 2. So that's it.
Thank you for the public comment. We have our police chief on who's heard the comment, so I'm sure he will let us know his responses to that at the appropriate time. And so we'll now see if there's any additional public comment.
So with the number ending in 5662, I'm going to allow you to speak. Hit *6 to unmute yourself, and you can address the council.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Hi. This is Tom Belt calling. You know, I'm going to make a little statement here tonight, and I know it's going to be redundant to a couple of the city council members who I've spoken to this subject before, but Our city is nearing the time when it will be conducting another utility rate study within the next year. And looking at the huge increase in water capital improvement expenses facing the city currently, I would like to remind the City Council about how important it is for the city to maintain accurate records of the differential costs to provide water service to St. Helena's 2,600 diverse water customers. Past city councils, along with city staff, have adopted the policy in St. Helena that we have a one water system and all water customers should pay the same volume rate. This is simply not true. As St. Helena's utility rate specialist, Mr. Bob Reed, pointed out in St. Helena's 2011 utility rate study, Napa water is by far the most expensive water in St. Helena's water supply, and an equitable tiered rate structure to accommodate the higher cost of this water is in full compliance with California's Proposition 218. Additionally, St. Helena incurs higher costs to provide water service to a few customers like those in Meadowood, Madrone Knolls, and some Spring Mountain water customers in high elevation zones requiring extra energy, pumping maintenance, and infrastructural expenses that only benefit those few water customers. While requiring all St. Helena water customers to subsidize the extra cost of service for a small percentage of customers is in violation of Proposition 218. This issue was brought up numerous times when Catherine Hansford was our consultant in the 2016 utility rate study. Ms. Hanford also cautioned the city about the illegality of having standby water rates, yet our city has failed to comply with this recommendation as well. In closing, it is important that our city's finance and public works departments work together to begin keeping accurate records of the actual costs to provide water service. There are many avenues open to city water districts to employ equitable water rates, but the cities must have the records to document the extra expense. St. Helena increased its water rate 64.24% between 2011 and 2016. In 2017, St. Helena raised its base rates again by 61.7%. If City Council maintains the same one-fits-all policy in the next utility rate study by requiring the majority of water customers to subsidize the extra cost of a few, I believe the city will be in violation of California's Proposition 218, which reads in part, the amount of a fee or charge imposed upon any parcel or person as an incident of property ownership shall not exceed the proportional cost of the service attributable to the parcel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for the public comment. Is there additional public comment?
There is no additional public comment.
Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council. We'll get into our reports by staff and city council, future agenda items, and AB 1234 reports. I just want to take a moment right now to mention that we really want to target with these meetings our 9 p.m. time that is our regularly scheduled time. If we all stay focused in terms of our comments and how we work through the agenda, the idea is if we can keep it within that time, I think our decision making, our focus is sharper, and everybody's comments and input is greatly appreciated. But if we also keep in mind that we're aiming for this 9 p.m. time, I think that will be helpful. So very appreciated from everybody. So we'll move into our reports by staff and city council. I will begin with our city attorney and see if we have any reports from there.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have no report this evening.
Very good. And our city manager.
Yes, Mayor. Just want to touch on two topics. The first is COVID. And if you followed the news media today and the local social media, great news for Napa County. The county has transitioned from the orange tier to the yellow tier. Our numbers are very low, the best that we've seen, I think, since the beginning of the pandemic. If you've also followed the state news, the state is planning to reopen on Tuesday, the June 15th, next Tuesday, a week from today. So that will be an additional reopening transition. And just in terms of a brief overview of how that applies to indoor and outdoor settings, For large mega events, and think concerts, stadiums, large events, there will be either a vaccine verification or a negative test required for indoor events. It's recommended for outdoor events. In terms of capacity limitations, there will not be any restrictions for physical distancing. There will not be any restrictions for attendees, customers, and guests. And in terms of masking, the guidance will be to continue to follow California Department of Public Health. So we do have a number of changes that are going to occur, and we'll be providing additional guidance as well moving forward. On the waterfront, we provided a press release late last week to share with you the numbers from the water meeting readings for the month of May 2021. The residential water use for May was 13% higher than our target conservation figures, so a little off there. The businesses did meet their 10% reduction target. Today's June 8th. This is the month where penalties will be assessed on overage in the month of June. Those bills will go out in early July. So because we're only 8 days into it, there's still time to adjust outdoor water usage in particular. That's where there's a lot of savings opportunity. And so we're looking forward to pulling together as a community to face this challenge. And that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move to our finance director.
Great, thank you very much. No other update further than what City Manager Prestwich had already mentioned is we really are pushing for the water conservation. We got to make sure that we're in this together in St. Helena. Some promising numbers, hearing that the conservation is happening, but we know we still have a long way ahead of us. So just a reminder for everyone to conserve. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to our city clerk.
Thank you. So the boards, committees, and commission recruitment was supposed to conclude today. However, I'm lacking some applications for the ATSC and Parks and Recreation. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the recruitment open and extend through the end of this week. And if any community member would like to apply, they can reach out to me and I can assist. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move to our public works.
No report tonight on Public Works.
Okay, and to our planning and building.
No report on planning and building either.
Okay, our parks and recreation.
Good evening. Lots has been happening since the last time we spoke to the council, but I will try to be brief. T-ball has ended for our youth. The next youth sports that'll be taking place will be youth soccer. Registration is going on now for U8, U6 and U8. Bocce League and adult softball are going well. The field out for softball looks great, as do the bocce courts, and people are having fun. And I've heard lots of people express how grateful they are to be back playing. Tennis camps and summer camps are registration is full for them, and they'll begin later this month. And we're expecting to have quite a bit of positive response into delivering that program. Martial arts is going strong. They are out in Crane Park and will be until we're able to move them back inside once the county says that we can do so. Yoga in the park started last night and will be every Monday at 6:30 at Lyman Park. And requests for rentals. Oh, and by the way, that yoga in the park is free to the public. And then requests for rentals continue. We're telling people right now that it's first come, first served for picnic areas. We will begin on July 1st taking rental requests for anything September 1st and forward. And that's my report.
Thank you. And we'll now move to police and fire.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. The police department has nothing to report tonight.
And fire department?
Only thing fire has to report is all the vaccine sites have concluded in the city of St. Helena at the Valley College campus and at the high school.
Thank you. And please pass on the thanks and gratitude to the department for all the work they've done with the vaccines. Very much appreciated.
I will. Firefighter Josh Wilmoth was heading it up and did a fantastic job.
Great, great. Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to our council and we'll begin with Councilmember Hall.
No updates. Thank you.
And we'll move to Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you so much. I'll just give a quick update. We did have our countywide climate change committee meeting that both the mayor and I attended. And we did agree as a group to go forward on all 3 ideas that we're going to want to work on, which are the temporary events to be zero waste, the countywide electrical vehicle plan, and also the looking at parking reduction ordinance. So all of those things we will be working countywide on. And then also I had a Cal Cities environmental policy meeting that was very informative. They go over all of the state bills that are going on. So it's very overwhelming with lots of information. But the one that stood out to me was this AB 1147 that's on the regional transportation plan. That's the active transportation plan. We have one that's gone through our active transportation and sustainable committee. That committee is really important, especially as we're working on climate change actions and wanting to have more active transportation in our community. And we're going to see that as part of our climate goals coming up here shortly. So I just wanted to raise that for everyone to be aware of and hopefully encourage people to get on that committee to help us.
Very good. Thank you. And we'll move now to Councilmember Hardy.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
And Vice Mayor Doring.
I have nothing to offer at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a few things. First, I want to recognize that in Pride Month, we raised the progress flag at City Hall in the last at the ceremonial flag at Lyman Park at the old City Hall in the last week. We continue working on our COVID business recovery programs and efforts. Continue working on emergency preparedness in town, also water conservation. We want to have everybody working together, large, small users, everybody pushing together to meet our goals. So thank you, everybody, for the continued participation in that. I have one other issue I want to sort of present to the council, and I'm seeing a couple folks from the schools here. I wrote up a recognition and a thank you to the students and the schools as we get to the end of the school year for just being a wonderful part of our community. And I'd like to see if the council would sign on to a letter of thanks and recognition with me. I'm going to read it. It's very brief, but if folks on the council would like to sign on with me, it would be wonderful to have us all joining together to recognize the students and the schools. So this is what it says. It says, this is a special message for our students, teachers, and parents as we get to the end of the school year. You are such an important part of St. Helena, and we want to commend you for your continued learning, support, and growth, and for helping to teach us too. We want to thank you for being the special people you are, and also thank you for helping us through all of our challenges of the last year. For those graduating or moving on to other things, please remember how proud we are of you. Your spirit and endeavors will extend out into the world and indeed can be the difference in creating the better world we all want to see. Please remember that wherever life takes you, St. Helena will always be a part of you. Please let this foundation bring you great compassion, peace, and strength. To the other classes coming up and those who will continue to be a part of our school community here, we are so fortunate to have you with us and look forward to another year with you, working, playing, and growing together as a community. Thank you for all you give and share and the part you play in our wonderful town. I can send that to Cindy, and perhaps she can send it out if you want to take a look at that, but it certainly would be nice to have folks on the council. We're short of time. Thursday is the last day of school, so I want to get this to the schools tomorrow morning. So we can figure out a way if folks want to sign on onto that. And with that, we'll close that section and move to our presentations and public recognitions. And this is a proclamation recognizing outgoing St. Helena Library Board member Susan Swan, who I believe is on the call with us. And I hope we'll be able to have a few words for us after the proclamation. Thank you for being here. So this is the City of St. Helena proclamation for Susan Swan on the Library Board of Trustees, proclamation on her retirement. Whereas Susan Swan has served the St. Helena community faithfully as a member of the Library Board of Trustees, and whereas served as an unofficial liaison between the St. Helena Public Library and St. Helena High School, where she has worked since 2007 as a library media specialist, and whereas Susan got her start at the St. Helena Unified School District volunteering to shelve books at the elementary school. And whereas Susan began her career as a library trustee with the City of St. Helena on November 18, 2008. And whereas as a trustee who has taken meticulous minutes, worked tirelessly advocating and supporting the St. Helena Public Library, which contributes to the intellectual, educational, informational, recreational, and cultural resources of this community. And whereas she encourages others to see libraries as an active and vital learning environment, along with a way to enlarge and enrich the user's world. And whereas these years of service have been marked by exemplary dedication to the best interests of students and library lovers alike and the betterment of the library. And now therefore be it resolved that we, the City of St. Helena, do hereby thank Susan Swan for all her years of service to the St. Helena Public Library and the students she has mentored as the St. Helena High School's library media specialist, and wish her much happiness as she begins this new chapter in her life. Thank you, Susan.
Wow, that's incredible. I think I would have been fine with this whole thing if you hadn't done that recognition to the students, because that kind of put me over the edge, because it has been a tough year for our students, and I think that was lovely. Thank you so much for this. I can't even wrap my mind around it. And thank you so much for allowing me to serve this very special library for so many years without saying, okay, your term's up, because it's been something I've been very, very proud of. This library has been my kids and my second home for years, and it's a very special place. And just like my kids are all grown up, the library has kept growing and growing, and it is a vital, thriving place that we must protect. And the staff is incredible. The community support, the city council support, it's all making and keeping the library very, very strong. So thank you for this recognition. It means a lot to me. And thank you for recognizing that the board really shepherds the library in a way that the staff doesn't, and it's all good. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say just a word?
Oh, yes, please.
So Susan, I just wanted to thank you personally for your professionalism, and really as a father of 2 children who's gone through the school district and has spent a lot of time in libraries. Thank you so much for being a model of adult compassion and going so much more beyond the realm of your job duties. You have been an inspiration to my family, and I want to just say thank you to you for all that you've done to the library communities, both in the school and in the city. You've touched our family, and I just am very grateful for you to be in our lives. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And your kids were an inspiration to me too. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, with that, we will move now to our consent items. And this is where members of the council or public may ask that any items be considered individually for purposes of considering alternative action or extended discussion, or for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. I'm going to read through them until we get to item 9.9, in which I will have to read. I'll just be reading the numbers. When we get to 9.9, I have to read the entire title. So I'll move through those and look for any hands that come up. 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, 9.5, 9.6, 9.7, 9.8, and now we'll go into 9.9. And I'm going to read this. Mr. Prestwich, I believe Mr. Rincon is on the call. Is that correct? Is it preferable?
Yes, he is present.
If I were to call on him, if he wanted to say anything, would I want to pull this item, or could we just do it in the context of me reading the title?
You could have him say something before the item if you like.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think you would have to pull it for that unless you want to.
Okay, so before I start reading, I'm seeing Mr. Rincon on the line. If he has any comment or input input at this point, we'd like to welcome you and glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Mayor Ellsworth and City Council members. I'm happy, I'm proud, and I'm eager to start with the City of St. Helena. And there's a lot of issues pending. I can see that from your agenda, and I'm ready to tackle them. So my pleasure.
Thank you for being here. It is appreciated. Okay, very good. So I'm going to read that title now, and that is 9.9. That's consideration and proposed approval of a resolution approving an employment agreement with Mark Rincon-Ibarra and ratifying the city manager's appointment to serve as the Public Works Director / City Engineer, and in accordance with California Code Section 54953C3, the recommended final action for Public Works Director, City Engineer, beginning June 30th, 2021, provides for an annual base salary of $184,505 with the following benefits: use of city vehicle, deferred compensation city match of up to $200 per month, health benefits consistent with the benefits offered to other employees of the city, and will receive retirement benefits at a new member PEPRA formula of 2% at 62, final compensation based on highest average during a 36 consecutive months period. So with that, that is our consent calendar. And is there a motion for approval of the consent?
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Mayor, we have a member of the public with their hand raised.
Oh, okay. So with that, then I will open the public comment and take that phone call. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bell, I've unmuted you. You can talk to the council.
Thank you, Cindy. Tom Belt again, guys. I want to just say during the 2011 utility rate study, St. Helena identified 30 water enterprise capital improvement projects that were projected to be completed in 2016. The revenue needed to complete these projects was to be paid out of a 64.2%.
Mr. Bell, what item are you referring to on this?
9.6, Mayor.
Okay, so what we'll do is, if we'll pull 9.6, we're going to have a motion to pass the rest of the calendar, then we'll circle back and take the call.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So is there a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved that we pass, so moved to pass all the consent items other than 9.6.
Second.
And roll call, please.
Councilmember Chateau,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Hall,
Yes.
Hardy,
Yes.
Ellsworth, Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Okay.
And so now we'll circle back to item 9.6, and we had Mr. Belt asking for that to be pulled. So are you still with us, Mr. Belt?
Oh, sorry, he got muted. Just 1 second. Oh,
Hello, am I there?
Yes, now we've got you.
Okay. I don't know if I should start all over again or not, but basically in 2011, we had a utility rate study where 30 enterprise capital improvement projects were projected to be completed by 2016. That was water enterprise capital improvements. The revenue needed to complete these projects was to be paid out of a 64.2% water rate increase over the next 5-year period. The projects ranged in cost from $25,000 for the city's toilet retrofit program to $377,000 for the Bell Creek inflow weir design permit and construction project. Among the CIPs listed in the 2011 study, 12 projects were not completed by the end of 2016. And as a result, City Council approved extending the project's completion dates for the same CIPs through 2022, along with another 61% water rate increase that began in 2017. Based upon the combined 125% water increase over this 10-year period, the city collected $10,371,073 to complete these same 11 capital improvement projects. What concerns me tonight is that city staff is again asking City Council to approve extending the completion of these same 11 capital improvement projects from 2122 to 2526. Unfortunately, with another increased projected cost of $2.6 million for a new total of $12,962,000. Admittedly, I'm not an accountant, and I would like to state I obtained this information through many hours of researching the city's 2011-2016 utility rate studies along with their accompanying documents. And as a result, yesterday I met with the city's finance director to share my information before speaking to the city council tonight. What I learned was that my calculations could not be confirmed or denied, but that they were, but there are existing positive capital improvement balances remaining in the city's water budget that have not yet been disclosed. I was also informed that it was possible some of the capital improvement numbers in my calculation may be inaccurate because of city accounting procedures unfamiliar to me. The bottom line is, whether I'm off by $3 million or $8 million, the fact remains the city has been collecting an increase in revenue from its water customers to pay for the completion of 11 capital improvement projects for 10 years. And tonight, city staff is again requesting another 4-year extension to complete these same 11 projects. Recently, City Council has discussed the need to conduct another utility rate study a year before it was scheduled because the city water infrastructure remains in such dire need of repair. As a water customer, I would like to know how the city has spent the millions of dollars it has collected in the past water rate increases for the 11 capital improvement projects remaining to be completed. And secondly, where the additional revenue will come from to address St. Helena's new $50 million capital improvement list, keeping in mind that St. Helena has one of the highest water rates in the Bay Area currently. And I thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments. Dr. Mitz or Mr. Presswich, do you have any thoughts about, in terms of, I believe Mr. Belt is asking for some sort of look at where we are in those 11 projects?
We can bring a report to you at a future council meeting on those items.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And so with that, if there are any other council questions on that, and I'm not seeing any other public comment. So I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Yes, I don't have a question, but I do have some comments would like to make. I think the request for information that would help our customers understand what the financial status of these projects is in terms of what's been collected to fund them, what's available right now to spend on them, and how that relates to projected total cost. That's a perfectly reasonable request. At the same time, having occasionally had to dive myself into projects that involve forensic accounting, I have a healthy respect for how much work is sometimes involved in answering questions that on the surface appear very simple. So it isn't necessarily a simple thing to answer very reasonable questions. So that's an observation I'd like to share. And I to the extent that our existing way of organizing and presenting information is not really accessible and understandable for members of the public, I suspect that the same will be true for most of us on the council, and that's where some attention. Meanwhile, I think we should and can move forward to approve the item on the agenda.
Very good. And I'm just going to make the comment that with Mr. Rincon now here, also looking at these aspects, there may be a way that it can be presented in a way that it works with staff so that as Mr. Hardy says, the challenges of putting together something can be large, and we want to make sure our staff is working along lines that work in balance with our work plan. So with that, is there a motion to pass item 9.6?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Chateau,
Yes.
Hall,
Yes.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Very good. We'll now move past seeing no public hearings. We'll move to old business in 11.1. This is fiscal year 2021-22 draft general fund budget update. And this is Dr. Mitz, our finance director.
Great, thank you very much. And our city clerk will be sharing her screen in just one moment. So what we're providing to City Council tonight, it is an update on the draft general fund budget that was presented at our first budget workshop. As soon as it looks like it's coming up now. Okay, so thank you very much. So we can go to the next slide. So this is basically an update of any updates that we had to the general fund budget. In particular, we are really concerned about the revenue forecasting because it was really a little too early to be able to accurately forecast the revenues in this COVID environment, moving to the yellow tier environment of COVID. So the three council budget priorities that we do have is to support the city's 3-year goals and work plan tasks, and you'll see where those are highlighted later in this report, is to ensure delivery of key capital improvement projects, and then also to protect service levels to the extent feasible. Next slide. So stated in the first budget workshop and just reiterated, we do have some difficulty in revenue forecasting just because of coming out of the COVID environment. The expenses did remain status quo with a few exceptions. The first was the restoration of salary and benefit concessions. It was restoration of 50% of the training budgets. Department increases were only considered with rationale from the departments, and budget investments did have to tie to city council goals. The next slide. So here's an update of the revenues from what was presented at the 513 meeting, which is the estimates, and also the assumptions. So we have them grouped in property tax, sales tax, transient occupancy tax, or TOT, and then other. And other is a small percentage of the other three. So for nothing changed in property tax and sales tax. And I did want to make a note that for sales tax, we do use Muni Services and we use their most conservative revenue estimate. But it's also important to note, if you look, they have 3 different categories when we get the estimates from Muni Services. They have a most conservative, they have a most likely, and they have an optimistic. So we usually take the most conservative, but the spread between the 3 is only about $200,000. So it's not this vast difference when you're looking at our revenue projections. The update that we did make was in TOT. So by the time we have actually had this meeting tonight, we did receive all of our April TOT numbers. And although the May TOT numbers are not due until the end of June, both myself and City Manager Presswich have been talking to our hotel establishments, and we have upgraded what our projections were going to be. So we've upgraded them to the 95% of fiscal year 18-19 actuals, which is pre-pandemic. And that is based off of the numbers that we're anticipating for our May revenues. For our TOT, they are performing at that 95th percentile. So we did update that. And then our other category, we didn't make any updates to that, but I do want to just want to reiterate that that also includes $575,000 in COVID relief, and that's the expectation that we'll receive the second installment in fiscal year 22. So that changed our total preliminary revenue estimates from $14.6 million up to $15.65 million. So next slide, please. So based on that information, knowing that we have updated our revenue projections, we did have a couple updates to our expenses. And this was based on council feedback, the updated expenses that we've done where we've actually receive more solid numbers in some areas of the general fund so we can update things that way. And also on the updated revenue projections, what we've done is we've updated the draft budget to include the additional tenant improvements to Napa Valley College that was mentioned at the first workshop, which is $250,000. It's updating and it's adding an additional $25,000 in grant assistance, knowing that we have a lot of unfunded CIP projects, and to have somebody on board to be able to help us write some of these grants. It also includes the CARES funding increase that will allow us to have an additional 10 to 15 more families in that CARES program, which is utility billing assistance. And then also there's some miscellaneous decreases due to other budget adjustments of $16,000. What this did is it added a total increase from the 513 estimated expenses of almost $274,000. So the next slide. And these are the additional cost drivers. The cost drivers, which is the difference between the fiscal year 21 adopted budget and then the fiscal year 22 draft budget. Everything remains the same, but I just wanted to just show, again, a brief recap where it shows which of these items are discretionary, which of the council goals they tie to. If you see the item in green, it does mean that it does tie to the budget survey and then the amount. And then you'll see highlighted there's with an asterisk, those are the items that were added since the 512 budget workshop. And again, those are the three items that we just discussed. So the first is the tenant improvements at Napa Valley College. And keep in mind, these are all in order from the highest dollar amount down to the lowest dollar amount. So if you go to the next slide. Again, a review of things that were already presented to City Council at the May 12th budget workshop. And then the final slide. And this adds the two additional items, the grant assistance and the additional CARES funding. So again, the total increase from the fiscal year 21 adopted budget is at $2.1 million. And if you can go to the next slide. So this is a general fund update from what was provided at the 513 meeting. So again, initially we were projecting the revenues at the 14.6 million, and it's been updated to 15.67 million. The updated expenses, and then this showed the original funding gap, which would have been 1.495 million, with a new funding gap of 730,000. And then again, the labor reduction, this is keeping 6 vacant positions. And so it gets us to our revised revenues and expenses. And so you'll see with the new numbers presented tonight, it is actually a net surplus of $45,000 as opposed to a deficit. And again, that primarily goes to the updated revenue numbers with the updated TOT. Next slide. So this is a reminder of the 6 vacant positions. So it's an open planner position, a police officer, recreation supervisor, senior librarian, senior civil engineer, and a maintenance worker. So again, that totals $776,000. Next slide. So here's the general fund, your estimated net position with these adjustments. So we're estimating our unassigned fund balance as of 6/30/2021 is 6.1 million. Our estimated revenues is 15.675 million. Estimated expenses, 15.6 million. Revenue less expense, so we show a positive of 45,000. And we're showing the estimated unassigned fund balance as at 6/30/2022 at 6.2 million, which is 40%. It is important to also notice that the budget forecasting is volatile because the city as well as the world is still trying to navigate the post-COVID environment, how that's going to hold up for both the short and long-term financial situation. And then also is important to note that the net position is based off of fund balance divided by the expenses. So that's where that 40% comes from. So the next slide. What we're looking for tonight from the City Council and for City Council discussion, direction, and also consideration, the current projected fund balance is 10% above the council policy of 30%. which it means it's approximately $1.2 million based off of that fiscal year 2020 or 21-22 draft. And again, that is taking the budget, the fund balance divided by the expenses. What the staff is looking for tonight to see if City Council does have any interest in utilizing some of that fund balance. With that being said, knowing the volatility of the revenues right now, staff is making the recommendation that if City Council does determine they would like to use one-time investment, use the reserves to utilize it for one-time investments and not ongoing operational expenses. Also taking into account that one-time $575,000 of federal COVID relief. We do recommend not taking that position below 35%, just again, based on the volatility of the revenues. And then we also recommend, similar to what we did 2 years ago, the utilization of an add back list if funds are available or as funds become available. And this is something we can, no decisions have to be made tonight. We can revisit it at a later date once more revenues are actually realized in fiscal year 22. So probably a few months out. I would recommend consolidating that with the first quarter finance report, which is the first 3 months. And then also if City Council has any other budget items that haven't been addressed that they would like to be brought forth in the City Council adoption of the budget, because we will be bringing the budget back forth in 2 weeks for adoption by the City Council. Next slide. So these are some add back item options. We're definitely not, tied into these. If council has anything else they'd like to add back to this item, but it's just certain things that had to be taken out of the budget due to budgetary constraints and or items that were brought forth at the last budget workshop. So the first and second items are the annual civic investment and storm drain investments. Those are not items that are included in the current year budget. So those are $5,000 each, which would be the annual investment based off of previous reports. Defensible space, and this is a matching grant. If the city is awarded this a grant, the total dollar amount for the match would be almost $318,000. And that can be divided up into 2 fiscal years if we're awarded the grant. Additional street paving up to $200,000 a year. Continuing funding the sick leave conversion liability of $152,000. Additional funding for nonprofits up to an additional $50,000. Laserfish, which is continue to building the online access, which is part of the transparency goal, and that would be an additional $35,000. And then full restoration of training budgets would be an additional $29,000. So with that presentation, I would be happy to entertain any questions and or feedback or direction, and also open up to City Manager Presswich if he has any additional feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Mitz. I would only add one item, and that is in terms of add back options. Obviously, we have 6 vacant positions as well, so you may want to look at the list of positions also for potential augmentation.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to the council here and see if there are any initial council comments at this point. Okay, seeing none. Oh, I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Thank you, Mayor. Several weeks ago, I posed the question of whether we could use some of our impact funds to mitigate against the expenses, the increased expenses related to the Napa Valley College. And I posed that question to our city attorney. I don't know, have we drilled down on that a little bit more to see whether we could reduce reliance on the general fund and at least get some funds from some of our impact fees? That's one question. Then I'm a little concerned about the additional $75,000 for the general for the litigation over last year. I frankly think that is not enough, sadly. I think we should have a conversation about that. And I just, with respect to the reserves, my thinking is evolving over time as I see the city evolve over time. And I think not only do we have to look at revenue volatility, we have to look at increasing risk. Risk is going up in almost every area: regulatory, litigation, climate change, fire prevention. So I think from my perspective, we need to be fairly conservative there. You know, I used to keep pushing for the 30%. Now I'm thinking, well, yeah, we, you know, talk about volatility. I mean, we got, you know, I guess I think like a lawyer, but anything can happen on any given day. So I'm a little, you know, I want us to keep that in mind. There's risks associated with all the things that I mentioned. And I for one, am serious about looking at maybe not all of those staffing positions, but really drilling down to see, you know, prioritizing them. They're all important, obviously, but we continue to talk about staffing. We can't really get a lot done without sufficient staffing. So that's my perspective, and that's my one question, at least on the, you know, the litigation fund and the tenant improvements. It'd be good to get a little bit more feedback on those two items. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comment at this point? I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy and then Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow on in support of Vice Mayor Doring's calling our attention to concerns about volatility. I share that concern, and it seems to me that although there's nothing we can do quickly and easily, that the logical goal and direction to pursue in that regard is an increased reserve, and it also has me thinking that the conventional ways of evaluating and rating, if you will, our municipal finances may reflect insufficient concern for the inherent volatility of municipal revenue, which goes directly to the archaic way in which our state tax system is organized. I mean, we're basically dealing with revenue streams that were organized to finance local government 100 years ago, and to say that the economy has changed dramatically in the last century is almost silly. But that's the reality. We've got an archaic revenue system in the state of California. Local governments have gotten perhaps the worst end of some of those challenges. And that means we've got to aggressively take it into account as the economy rebounds and our revenues increase. So I just see a lot of necessarily hard decisions moving forward. I think we need to be disciplined, but I really think we do need to pursue a reduction in the impact of that volatility on our ability to maintain our staff and provide services. And I don't think there's any way to accomplish that without increased reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chateau.
Okay, great. I agree with that about the reserves. And what I heard is that we can go up to 35% and still have 1.2 million to talk about tonight for add back. So I would be comfortable with that. And I think that the that grant money, that 25,000, is so important. There's so many grant opportunities out there right now for our infrastructure, for the fire prevention work, for climate change work. We know that we can get more money and leverage that if we have somebody that can help us with grants. So I love seeing that. And I would want to add back in there that money for the matching grant for the defensible space, knowing that that's everything to prevent fires from coming into our community. And then also I'm interested in the streets because that was, you know, the top concern in the community survey. We saw that. So I like the idea of having a bigger impact on streets as well.
Thank you. Any additional council comments? Okay, so I'm going to then take it to the public and open it to public comment.
I'm not seeing any public comment, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I'll bring it back. And I've got a few thoughts. Certainly in terms of reserve, what we have learned over the last really year and a half, any given day, anything can happen. And the sort of more reserved, the stronger we are, the more able we are to deal with certain situations. So I'm in favor of having a strong reserve. But I also want to make sure that we're funding the things that we need to fund and can get in front of. So in looking at the buyback list, April, is there a way to re-put that up there? The list that was.
Yes. Cindy, I can share my screen.
And I want to echo the vice mayor in looking at the vacant positions and in a sense prioritizing those vacant positions. So if we're looking at bringing those back, what is the priority there? And having what a plan would be on those positions.
And I apologize, I can't. I'm having issues screen sharing.
Okay.
Cindy, can you? I'll do it.
Councilmember Chateau.
And if I can add.
Oh, go ahead, April.
I was going to add one point of clarification, just to Councilmember Chateau's comment about the 35% brings us to 1.2 million. The 10% right now, so right now we're at 40%, an estimated 40%. 30% is what the current council goal is. The difference between that 10% is 1.2 million. So city council does want to take it down to 35%. It's about 600,000 that you actually have to be able to work with. So I just wanted to provide that point of clarification. And then I will, I do have responses to some of the other comments, but I can wait until all council has made their comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Chateau.
Well, that's too bad. I liked having 1.2 million to work with, but thank you so much for that clarification. My only comment was that I thought that at this point we were looking at one-time investments with this money, since we don't know if the economy is going to stay stable. And so with staff, my concern is just adding a position. Once we have them, that's an ongoing expense. So that's one consideration to think of if we would want to wait and just make sure that these numbers stay true for the next couple months.
That's a good point. Good point to make. Is there a thought here in terms of looking at this list? We're going to be coming back with a budget in 2 weeks. And when is our next information on the TOT returns? When is that expected?
So May TOT is not due until the end of June, and June TOT won't be due until the end of July. So usually it's right around the first of the month following that we actually get the information. And as stated before, this is a list of add back options. It isn't something that we would have to include in the budget. It's similar to what we did a few years ago. What we did is once we started getting, the updated information, found out because our property tax numbers, we actually don't get, our property tax right now is based off of estimates. We'll get the actual property tax numbers in August. And so sometimes the further you move along in the fiscal year, we'll have updated numbers. So this is, again, the various options. If council would like us to add it, we can definitely add it to the budget that we'll be taking back for you in 2 weeks for adoption, just knowing that would be coming from the estimated reserves.
Okay. I want to just, a thought would be if over the next 2 weeks, when we're thinking of the budget, if this list of options is given to the council to think about over the next 2 weeks, because, we're balancing from a bunch of different edges here. And so is there any detriment in sort of thinking about these, having the council look at these over the next 2 weeks and then returning with our judgment at that point? Or is it preferable to look at something right now? And I'm seeing Councilmember Hall with a hand up.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm going to reply exactly to your comment, Mayor. I was just thinking in general. Part of the exercise here, I think Dr. Mitz is challenged with is she has to start with a revenue number and then make everything fit into that number. That's how we're getting a balanced budget. Our community needs us to focus on what are our needs. What do we need to do to move ahead as a community? And if our revenue is short, then that's part of this conversation. So when I look at this list, I don't see anything on the add back list that I wouldn't want baked into our budget. Certainly just adding the frozen positions back would be a good start. Just putting them back drops our net position all the way down to 34%, just adding those bodies back before we take anything else off this list. So last week or last time we met, we talked about street paving, spending $800,000 a year for 5 years will get us to the exact same position we're at today. Still looking at $11 million in street repair from that point forward. This list here has an item of $200,000 to add back to the list if it can fit in there. It sounds like to get that fitted in, we're going to have to cut $200,000 from somewhere else in the budget because it's about even right now. The same thinking is true with our civic investment, our annual storm drain investment. These are things that several committees and consultants have told us must be included in our budget. It's irresponsible of us not to include these things. Okay, that's what every consultant has said. So somewhere in here, we're going to have to either find a way to boost revenue dramatically, or we look internally and cut costs to fit these items if we want the community to move forward. That's just my general sense of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the perspective. Councilmember Hardy or Vice Mayor Doring, any thoughts at this point? I'm saying Councilmember Hardy.
Well, yes, I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but I think to understand the nature of our predicament and to make good decisions moving forward, we really have to take account of the fact that the hole that the city has dug for itself with respect to infrastructure maintenance has been dug deeper and deeper over a long period of time. And so we are in a really challenged position when we try to climb out of that hole while we're still in an economic recession, at least so far as measured by municipal revenues. So I appreciate, I've been speaking about the need to take care of our infrastructure for years. So I really appreciate Councilmember Hall's emphasis on the importance of these big infrastructure items, but I think we might do better to wait just a bit longer for more clarity on our revenues. And I think some of these things, frankly, we really will be able to make better choices in September than we can make today. That's my sense of it. And at the same time, I think we have to be as aggressive in rebuilding our reserves as we can. And I don't think 40% is an appropriate target long term. I think if we go back and we look at where we've been with reserves and what we thought that meant for us even a few years ago, what we'll see is that 40% reserve was not enough. So I don't know what the perfect balance is, but I think right now at this moment, in terms of add backs, I'm not sure I'd go as far as $600,000. Maybe you could talk me into 500,000, but I'd rather be talking about $200,000 or $300,000. And then that does also prompt me to acknowledge that Councilmember Hall, I think, is absolutely right to accomplish what we should. We need to take a hard look and see if there are things presently in the budget that don't need to be there. And again, just following on what's already been said, from my perspective, restoring our staffing to an appropriate level is one of the highest priorities, because our whole process for getting work done is compromised without adequate staffing. And that really includes the process of moving forward on things like infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Member Hardy. All I'm trying to do this evening, because I don't think we can solve it tonight as much as I would like to, but what I'm trying to do is remind the community that Dr. Mitz's obligation is to match expenses to revenue. This town has frittered away its its heritage, frankly, the glory of the town. It's a disaster. And we're faced with at least $100 million in infrastructure expense. So at some point, Lester is absolutely correct. We're in a deep, deep hole. And at some point, we're going to have to climb out of it. And the only way to do that is to lighten the load on expenses today to make room for steady improvement on infrastructure and recovery. And we can't look to the outside world to solve that for us. It's just not going to happen. So somewhere along here in this conversation, I mean, there's no room for anything here. There's not one item on this list in our current budget that's going to move us forward as a city. It's everything on the add back list that will help begin to get us there. That's the context. And if we don't get addressing the items on the add back list, the revenue number will continue to come down. Then we're going to have to continue to shrink the expense side of the equation to match the revenue. We're obligated to run our numbers that way. So that's my context. So I'm happy to continue to consider what has to go on the list. My thinking right now is I'm looking internally at where do we cut to begin to address the problem. That's how I do it. We're short on revenue sources. It takes a long time to get it going, and we've so far not even had a single discussion about it.
Thank you for the perspective, and then we will be getting into the revenue discussion this evening as well. In looking at this, and I want to recognize that I think these are all very important, and as mentioned, get us further down the road. I'm looking at on the defensible space matching grant. Is there a timing issue on that? If we're holding in terms of looking at where we're going to be in 2 weeks with the budget, looking at this in conjunction with the budget, the issue of the defensible space matching grant, is there a timing issue? If we were to pick an item such as that, that's a critical need that has a timing issue, is there any information on that grant?
There is not a timing issue for that as of yet. We still don't know if we're going to be awarded the grant. If we are awarded the grant, at that point, we'd need to make the decision. But because of the project length, from how I understand it, is that we could actually split that cost over the match over 2 fiscal years.
Okay. Well, my thought would be then to take this and for the council to have this list over the next 2 weeks to consider, and we can do our separate looks at where we think and which of these we think we can pick up. I do want to continue to support the idea that a strong reserve is very important. So as we look at what's coming in and what we're spending, that reserve is going to be important. So if there's council consensus to take this information and really consider it, I think it's very valuable. But I think if we take a look and because I think if we try to cut it up tonight and make the decisions, we may not fully analyze what we're moving. So my thought would be to take this information and over the next 2 weeks, we on the council can look and see how it could integrate. Councilmember Hall, any thoughts there?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only additional request would be if Dr. Mitz could provide, and maybe this already exists, April someplace, basically department by department budget view, if there's a simple way to do that.
And I'm seeing Council or Vice Mayor Doring. Dr. Mitz, you have that? Did that request come through there?
Yes. And again, I'll wait till all council comments, and I do have a few comments to respond.
Very good. So I see Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, this is directed to the council. So in fairness to Dr. Mitz and the staff, they really need to get some direction from us tonight, right? Because we have to adopt the budget on the 22nd. And I think it's going to be, I understand what the mayor is saying, that we can digest this, but I think the staff is really looking for us, whether as Councilmember Hardy suggests that we, just adopt this budget, leave the add-ins out for now, revisit it in September, obviously, or pick and choose a couple of the add-ins now. I think we should make that decision tonight, frankly, so it gives the staff a sufficient amount of time to present a budget that we can adopt. And then it's obviously budgets can be changed, right? Amended. I think we're going to know more in September than we know now. It's not that far away, frankly. I just hesitate to sort of just let this drag on until the next meeting. So okay, that's my 2 cents.
So if we take a look at the list and if we, in a sense, maybe concur about a number, whether it's 3 or 5 or 600,000 or more, if we look at that list and we can concur on what we all agree on to start with, maybe that's a way to go. And I certainly look at the fire risk. I look at the street paving. I also look at the infrastructure, the building infrastructure. Perhaps if there's a way to look at, instead of the 500,000, a smaller portion on that. Any thoughts from the council on priorities on the list if we were to give direction tonight?
I'm fine giving no further direction tonight and just agreeing to what's been presented with an understanding to Vice Mayor Doring's comments that we'll continue to look at it.
So you're okay if we don't make the recommendations tonight, but we return to this after we push through our current budget and we circle back as we get more information as soon as we can, as the information about what's coming in arrives. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that's what Vice Mayor Doring just said. So if we, I think it sounds like we're going to have difficulty going through the list. So if we don't want to do that, then let's accept what's presented with an understanding that budgets can always be modified. Obviously, The revenues number going to change. The further down we go, the smarter we'll get. The problem is we're delaying decision making. So I'm in favor of let's make a decision. Let's help the staff get their work done. And as a council, we've seen the data in front of us. I think we have a context on the data. We're in an extremely challenging position. And we've got another meeting already set for 2 weeks from now. So
Okay.
I'm just suggesting let's approve what's here right now and move forward.
Very good.
And
So it looks
if I can add, if I can just add just a couple things for context. But yeah, there is definitely no reason why you'd have to make a decision on that add back list tonight. Again, it was just some ideas. I do feel like we are going to get better numbers as we move along to know, because we don't want to bite off more than we can chew, essentially, on this one. To respond to Vice Mayor Doring's earlier comments about the use of impact fees, we did check into that, and unfortunately, we cannot use impact fees because although we're going to be utilizing the property, we don't own the property. So that's kind of where the distinction was when we looked into that. So we cannot use impact fees for that. As far as the litigation costs for the attorney, that is something that we could, if council wanted to provide an increase, we could, or as you said, the budgets can be adjusted. We make budget adjustments, several times during the year that we do bring back to City Council. And as both Vice Mayor Doring and Councilmember Hall said, on the 22nd, we do have to adopt the budget that day. And so that is something that we are looking for some pretty solid direction tonight, even if it's to move forward with the revenues and the expenses as we have them, knowing that it's a balanced budget, but also knowing we have that leeway in reserve. So if something does happen that we need to come back first thing in July or August and ask for a budget increase, we do have that leeway, as well as the add back list options for City Council's discretion at a later time.
I'm City Manager.
Yeah, and just one additional point of clarification on prior conversation, and this is with respect to the $25,000 that's built into the budget currently that we've added as an increase since the last time we talked, associated with grant research. And that's primarily just looking at the organization and knowing that our grant manager position today is deeply invested in paperwork associated with the COVID emergency, the LNU complex, the glass fire, and also stewardship of the hazard mitigation grants that we've had successfully awarded in the past, as well as the new ones that we're pursuing now. And we have a capacity challenge at the moment, and looking for some augmentation in the form of some help, I think will serve us well, particularly because we have so many very nice shovel-ready projects ready to go if we can find some additional resources. So that is built into the budget tonight. It wouldn't be part of the add back list.
Okay, thank you. So
how about with respect to the storm drain? So if you allocated an additional $500,000, we're not even close to being ready to spend that money. So, obviously those projects that are shovel ready are going to be more important than those that are like, well, we need to put this kind of money into storm drain. Don't get me wrong. I agree that delay is not good, but there's certain items on the list they're more, I don't know what the word is, ready, I guess, to have monies allocated to them. And so we should focus on that. My recommendation would be, frankly, to keep it as is, 40% reserve, maybe double the litigation, the increased litigation cost to $150,000. Revisit this in September to see how we're doing, and then focus back on those add-ons then, and do it in a serious way. Because I agree with Councilmember Hall that all the delay on those projects is actually going to hurt our city. It actually reduces revenue if you start looking at it, in a more sophisticated way. So that would be my thought.
Thanks, Vice Mayor Doring. One comment regarding shovel ready. We do have a sizable shovel ready project that's unfunded today that's not included in these numbers, and that's the Mills Lane storm drain. We still haven't figured out how we're going to pay for that. It's going to be $4.25 million or something. I don't know what it is, but we got to come up with money for that somewhere. The best and easiest place, obviously, would be the general fund. I don't know if that's appropriate or even legal, but if it's going to be the general fund, our 40% number drops drops to about 10% or 15% without adding any staff.
So let's take the Vice Mayor's recommendation on pushing forward with the existing budget and then returning to these issues that are very important, and it is appreciated you're highlighting them in such a way, Councilmember Hall. So the one area I do want to make sure is that we're getting funding on fire mitigation. So as we move forward in the conversation, knowing that as a council, being ready to allocate monies to those types of things, I think are going to be of value. So just to keep the conversation moving tonight, if we can all agree that we'll allow the staff to come back with the current budget, and then we'll revisit these add-ons as soon as possible, looking at September when we'll have a better picture. Do we have consensus with that so we can sort of move through this to the next item?
Works for me.
Yes.
Okay, very good, and really appreciate the input. So staff, you've got the direction now, and we'll move to item 11.2, and this is our presentation of the fiscal year 2021-22 long-range financial forecast and California Municipal Financial Health Diagnostic. And this also is Dr. Metz.
Great, thank you. And our city clerk will be sharing her screen as well. Okay, so again, this is, as Mayor Ellsworth had stated, this is our long-range financial forecast and also the fiscal health assessment or fiscal health diagnostic. It's kind of referred to as both things. So if you go to the next slide. So the long-range financial forecast, or we call it the LRF around here just to make it a little easier, the LRF. What it does, it provides a current and long-range financial assessment of the general fund, and it looks at a high-level overview of the revenues, expenditures, what the estimated fund balance is, and this is the unreserved fund balance, any emergency reserves that we have, and it's also just important to note that it's for illustrative purposes only, and it is again, it's a very high-level overview of this. Next slide. So the objective of the long-range financial forecast is to provide an early financial assessment when we look 10 years out to the future. And again, it's very high level. It's to look out. If we all of a sudden see things dipping really far below, it does let the city and the council identify any significant issues that should be addressed. We do update this annually, and it does illustrate trends over the next 10 years. Next slide. So some of the assumptions that were made in this long-range financial forecast is we do utilize the draft fiscal year 21-22 revenues and expenses that were just presented to City Council. So when you see updated on the charts, I did provide some updates to make sure that we had brand new information. The revenues, we assume in this forecast that they return to pre-COVID levels by 2022-2023. And we also utilize previous year's actuals, but we do remove any non-reoccurring revenues and expenses that we have identified. We do take recommendations from the Infrastructure Task Force, or the ITF, that City Council had about 2 years ago, and we utilize their calculations for the hotel revenues. And then the long-range financial forecast, as stated in the last council report, it does not include the Mills Avenue storm drain project, which currently right now it's $4.6 million that's unfunded. So the next slide, please. There are certain risks to the long-range financial forecast. So first is COVID-19 recovery and the volatile economy that we're currently in. It does not take into consideration any state takeaways and borrowing. During times of economic downturn previously, the state of California had previously shifted, borrowed, or took money from local cities to cover its own budget shortfalls. While safeguards have been put into place since that time, it cannot be predicted if the state will once again borrow money from local governments because based off of some of the other state guidelines, they can borrow money again once every 10 years. So unfortunately, we're getting to that time right now. Another risk is our unfunded liability pension costs. So if there's an economic downturn and PERS does not realize their returns that they are expecting, our unfunded liability pension costs can go up. So it does not take that into consideration. It does not take into consideration any compensation increases through just normal CPI increases or through a comp and class study similar to what we did a few years ago. It does not take in consideration our fire department. Currently, our fire department is working under a hybrid model and does continue to remain a very low-cost alternative to a full-fledged full-time fire department. So this is one vulnerability that it does not take into consideration if we did have to actually go to a full-time fire department model as opposed to a hybrid. Any health premiums that will just naturally increase over the years. Right now, we've seen a little bit more of a stabilization in healthcare increases, but a few years ago, we did see increases, projecting up to 7 to 10% increase. It does not take into consideration any major asset recapitalization. It does not take into consideration any new major one-time expenses and or anything that is unanticipated, such as a couple of years ago, we did have several different expenses on the water side that water funds did pay for, but they were water main line breaks that we might not have the funds on the water account to do it. So we do have to take that into consideration. And it also does not take into consideration the storm drain improvements and repairs. So next slide. So there are two scenarios that's presented to you tonight. Typically, we'd have 3 scenarios, and the third scenario usually factors in any type of recession. But since we are currently in a recession, getting out of it, we did not do one of those types of scenarios. So the first scenario does include the COVID-19 recovery, which is a full a recovery of revenues by fiscal year 23. It does include the farmstead hotel revenues starting in fiscal year 24 and 25. And this is because this is an approved project right now. And we use the ITF's recommendations or their projections as far as what revenues they would bring in. The second scenario includes a baseline, plus it adds an additional second hotel in fiscal year 25-26, and does include the infrastructure task force revenue projections. And then it is important to notice that both of these scenarios do include line items based on some feedback from last year's long range financial forecast. So it does include separate line items for $500,000 per year of investment in storm drains and civic improvements starting in fiscal year 22-23. Next slide. So here's the base, and we did provide an update based on some additional information that we had that was included in the last item for the revenues and expenses for the fiscal year 22 draft budget document. So here you can see in the first scenario with farmstead coming in, what you really want to look at is your ending fund balance. And so it's line item 14. And again, this is taking into consideration adding $500,000 for storm drains and civic improvements, and you'll see that in lines 9 and 10. So you'll see where our fund balance, you see it slowly deteriorating. If you start adding about $1 million into the budget for those 2 projects, and we did increase a 5% escalator in the future years out. So you can see where our unassigned net position, you see it start trickling down, fiscal year 23 to 25%, next fiscal year 13%, on down where you start getting into a deficit fund balance in fiscal year 27. Next slide. And again, this is a scenario 2 where it has the second hotel added. And so again, you'll start seeing where you see your net position, again, line 18. But again, probably important to point out too, in line item 16, you can see that every year, up until you get to the new hotels being added, you're taking from your balance reserves. So those are the 2 scenarios that we have for you. There are a lot more detail to both of those scenarios that's included in the full report. And I will be updating the full report to have these updated numbers in there. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on just the overview of this forecast.
Any initial questions from council? I'm seeing Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mitz. I really appreciate the overview. Just if you wouldn't mind, can you put up the scenario 1 again? Thank you, Cindy. So just to make sure I understand, fiscal, thank you. Thank you. So ending fund balance, line 14. Tonight, we're just reviewing fiscal year 22, ending at 6.21 million, or approximately 40%. Is that correct?
That is correct. So these numbers do line up with the budget document.
Okay, so this number excludes adding in any frozen positions, anything on the add back list, and $4.6 million likely to come from the general fund for the Mills Lane project, which would put that $6.21 million down to about $1 million actually. And let me see here. So out at fiscal year 26-27, our net position is, negative, and this is with the Farmstead Hotel generating additional revenue for us, and we're running negative all the way out. So right now it looks like there's a year or a year and a half of breathing room given the numbers that are shown here. But what we know in terms of needs, these numbers are going to be much worse going forward. Even with Farmstead coming online, if we don't get the Mills storm drain done, Farmstead numbers aren't going to be cranking. So we've got to get the storm drain in. We've got to get Ted and Laddie Hall what they need, and they've got to get under construction ASAP so we can get this revenue going. And you can see we're still going to be short everywhere else across the board here. So revenue is absolutely the highest priority. Buying more water, addressing anything else, fixing streets, all of this other work we've got to do, we need revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the perspective. I have a thought here that I want to look at. One of the things when we first started creating this long-range financial forecast, looking at visitation, hospitality growth, one of the things I want to keep considering is what does it look like in terms of diversification of our economy, looking at other aspects, whether it be tech or medical tech, education. We know with Adventist Health and Blue Zones here, now there may be some opportunities to talk with them about some other opportunities for revenue. One of the things we did learn in the pandemic was when visitation goes away, having additional generators in the community is important for not just the city revenue, but also for the folks who live here and work here. So one thought I do have is that as we look at our long-range financial forecast, we do consider what some diversification of economy might look like. That may be a discussion for a different day, but certainly a thought that I have. I'm going to see if there's any other council comment before I open it to public comment. And seeing none, I will go to public comment and see if we have any comment there.
There is no public comment.
Very good. So we'll bring it back to council. Any additional council comment on the long-range financial forecast?
I do have
I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy, and then I'll come back to you, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you.
Well, here again, I'm just going to express my support for Councilmember Hall's comments on this. It's not a pretty picture, and it is, I think, a reasonable measure in effect of how deep the hole we're in. And my instinct And it's just an instinct based on the whole arc of related events and situations in St. Helena over the last 30, 40, 50 years. My instinct tells me that this forecast doesn't fully capture our unfunded liabilities. That is to say, I think if one had the time and the resources to do so, I think we would find other things besides the Mills Lane storm drain project that aren't captured in the budgeting. So I end up thinking, it's a pretty grim look, but probably all in all a relatively optimistic forecast. So that's not cheery news. That actually is an entertaining, perhaps, way of saying it's probably worse even than it looks.
Yeah.
So I know that the whole subject of municipal revenue has been a source of considerable debate and controversy within the community. And I know that there are many different ideas about what the ideal revenue sources would be, and some thoughts about how we might get there. The only thing I can say at this point for sure is that we desperately need additional revenue, and that we're going to need each step of the way to make plans based on reliable forecasts and reliable sources. Once things become concrete, it's reasonable, even essential, to take them into account, but we have to be really careful not to count things that aren't concrete. And so as for example, a second hotel, I don't think we should even consider that in terms of understanding our fiscal position and our future plans until there's something that's real, and whether it's a hotel or some alternative to a hotel. Right now, even projecting the timing and quantity of TOT revenues from Farmstead requires, at least in certain aspects, a leap of faith. And that's inevitable in forecasting. None of us has a crystal ball, and a whole lot of assumptions have to be made in order to put together a forecast at all. But to my view, what that means is it's really important to articulate and understand what the assumptions are. If we understand what we know and distinguish between what we know and what we assume, we're in a much better position to evaluate the forecast itself and our reliance on it. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's also important to remember we're also looking through a climate and social justice lens at what we do in terms of everything. And so revenue wants to calculate those factors in. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau and Councilmember Hall. And then I think we need to move forward through the next item.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I was just going to say having that second hotel in there helps me to see it forecasted. So I like to see it in there and would like to see, and maybe this will come up on another item, the other more likely things that we can do for revenue generation forecasted, because then it gives me at least an idea of what we're talking about in terms of numbers as we move forward to looking at addressing it.
Thank you. And Councilmember Hall, a comment?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to follow up on your earlier comments and Member Shadow's comment just now about other revenue ideas. You know, I was thinking, luckily, thankfully, I should say, we're moving out of some of our buildings, and we have other vacant space that the city owns. You know, you think, well, what can you do with that space? How do you generate revenue? At least a couple of bucks. Every dollar would help us. And we do have just an exceptional school system here, private and public, and it's just incredible. And we have people lined up on waiting lists to get in from other communities. So I don't know what it costs, but maybe Public Works has some idea of are our city buildings, i.e. The Railroad Avenue City Hall, the Carnegie Building.
Councilmember Hall, if I sorry to interrupt, but I believe that's the subject we're going to touch on in the subsequent item. So would your thought be to wait till we get to that, or do you want to?
Sure, I don't care.
Okay, yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that's where we're going to go in the conversation on the subsequent item here. So if that's okay, and we'll return to that, and then make the we'll look at the health diagnostic now, and then if you don't mind holding those thoughts, because I think they'll be more cohesive at that point.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So April, could you just get us into the section on the financial health diagnostic, and just give us an overview of that, please?
Perfect. Yeah, Cindy can share her screen. And it will be slide number, let's see, that'll be slide number 10. The other direction. There we go. So again, just a quick overview of what the fiscal health assessment or the fiscal health diagnostic is. It was initiated by the League of California Cities, and it was developed by Michael Coleman, who is the principal fiscal policy advisor to both the League of California Cities as well as the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers. And it's also endorsed by the Government Finance Officers Association. So these are all very, very well-renowned, good, good resources that we all go to, and I'm very happy to have this assessment. So next slide. So what it does, it's designated to assist agencies in fiscal evaluation. So similar to the long-range financial forecast, it does validate fiscally healthy areas. It identifies programs and areas to improve. It avoids being blindsided by problems, and it also helps others understand the city's financial position just in a really easy, quick summary format. So if you go to the next slide. So if we can make that a little bit bigger, I don't know if that's, I think we discussed that it wasn't possible to make it bigger. Well, I will try to squint my eyes. So green is good. We'll start with the easy. So green is good. And what happens is when we do the fiscal health assessment, there is background worksheets. So that's how we complete it. Based on the information plugged into the worksheets, which is the actual financials, it will automatically trigger the colors of these particular items. So as you can see, we have a lot of them in green, which is good. We've made some good strides in that area. The orange items are the caution, and these items primarily changed due to COVID-19 and what it did to our revenues for the current fiscal year. So you'll see the net operating deficit and surplus that changed to yellow to orange because of us having to use reserves to balance the current year budget. Again, the second item is fund balance. So reserves are sufficient over multiple consecutive years. So here's where you see it turn to orange. So much like the long-range financial forecast, it also projects out a few years. So it does recognize that all of a sudden our reserves are starting to dip if we just go with our natural assumptions. You'll see the next orange item is balancing the budget with temporary funds, the use of reserves, selling assets, deferring asset maintenance. So I feel like we've already kind of covered that in the long range financial forecast. So again, those are things that we are not actively investing in, or we're not able to invest in during the previous fiscal year. And then we do have two warning areas, and it's both the capital asset condition as well as service level solvency. Both of those are tied together. So the service level solvency ties into, are we maintaining the assets we have? In particular, it looks at the road conditions, which we kind of talked about during the last council meeting with our pavement management index, as well as investing in our capital assets. So again, it is a very quick summary of it. There's additional information in the staff report, but I like this because instead of having a lot of very fine detailed numbers, it gives you a quick green, orange, or red, how are we doing? So based on that, I'd be happy to answer any questions about this assessment.
I just have a comment I want to make before we ask for any questions. What I've appreciated with this was, in a sense, linking in with the League of California Cities. And if folks have seen Michael Coleman do a presentation or read any of his work, it's really helpful in understanding municipal finance and how it may differ from private finance. He offers some pretty good insight. And what this helped us do when we brought it to the city was, in a sense, understand a little more objectively where we are, benchmarking in terms of other cities, et cetera, and getting a view, sort of an objective view of where we sit in relation to others as well. So Michael Coleman, who helped develop this, I really recommend checking into some of his work because it's very helpful related to municipal finance. So I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you, Mayor Ellsworth. Dr. Mitz, am I right in thinking that this analysis looks at the city's budget exclusive of the water fund and the wastewater fund, those enterprise funds?
That is correct. So this is just on the city's general fund.
Thank you.
Any other council comments? Seeing none, I'll open it to public comment and see if we have any comments there. Seeing
There's
none.
no public comment.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. And any other council comments? I'm Councilmember Hardy bringing up the question about the water fund. It would be interesting to have something looking at water and wastewater funds in the same sort of way. Any other council comments before
All the
we
boxes
move?
would be red for sure.
Councilmember Hardy.
Yeah, well, the way in which I see the water fund and the wastewater enterprise fund tying in here is that, you know, they do relate to overall levels of service, and they are a factor in staffing. And of course, you know, staff that's dedicated entirely to the water department or the waste treatment plant, you know, those expenses are going to be captured in those funds. But you know, there are areas and, you know, take any project that goes through our planning process, our entitlement process that has any sort of water or wastewater component, you know, I don't know that we can really separate the general fund component from the enterprise fund components in terms of understanding whether everything is working together in a way that's fiscally sound and financially healthy. So that's just an observation. You know, looking at the indicators and where we stand, I remain concerned that this methodology has tended in the past to overstate the health of our reserve position, because I don't think we can understand where we are today if we don't look back and realize that we needed to have a bigger reserve in order to end up in a better situation right now. Frankly, I just think that the conventional view on the appropriate level of reserve for a municipality of our size is not adequate guidance for certainly the 21st century reality, but I suspect it's been inadequate for a long time. I think there is a long-standing culture, undoubtedly driven in large measure by the strong resistance of most voters to increase taxes. There is a real strong resistance to funding adequately the services that everyone wants. Neglect of infrastructure, it's not unique to St. Helena. It's national, if not worldwide. I view that report, this analysis, with that note of caution, and I think we all should. Thank you.
Thank you. So bringing it forward here, this is receive and file. So we've discussed this. We appreciate everybody's input. And with that, we can move now unless there are additional comments, to new business. And this would be our discussion and direction regarding financing and revenue options to address city and St. Helena infrastructure deficiencies. And this is our city manager, Mark Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. And the prior two items on the agenda and the council's comments have simply provided the introduction to this conversation, this particular agenda item. On our work plan for this current fiscal year, this looking forward, we have a task due in the first quarter to prepare financing and revenue options for the City Council's review and consideration to address city infrastructure deficiencies. And given the significant, really extraordinary infrastructure needs that we have that are associated with the general fund, the water fund, the wastewater enterprise, storm drains, which are part of the general fund, they do not have a dedicated funding source, as well as our roads. I have prepared this report in a way that really distinguishes this with a focus on near-term opportunities, not longer-term opportunities. So I'm defining near-term opportunities as essentially 3 years or less to really consider opportunities for significant investment. So in addition to noting the challenges on each of those funds that I've mentioned, our Administrative Services Director earlier commented on some additional general fund constraints that are outlined in this report, including the slow transition of our fire department from what it was originally a volunteer fire department to what is today a hybrid department. But today we are not paying for staffing to essentially be in the station 7 days a week in the evenings. We are paying stipends for people to be on call, and we're paying for calls that when they occur. But the city that model is saving the city a lot of money at the moment. But there's pressure on the system that at some point may require additional staffing in the evenings. And I also want to note just the challenges on the housing front. We haven't talked too much about that today, but clearly we have significant challenges on the housing front, particularly to deliver affordable units. And often in cities, when cities consider efforts to do that, there's often some form of a subsidy involved, and that would add an additional constraint to the city's financial challenges. So the focus of tonight is really to start a conversation about whether it's really a conversation about an incremental approach to addressing the challenges that we've outlined, or looking at ways to near-term accelerate investment in the city's deficient infrastructure. So the staff report outlines 5 recommendations, really 5 options, and I would emphasize that while some of these can be combined, it's probably not practical to combine all of them, particularly on revenue options. So I'd like to just walk through a couple of these. And again, the focus is what can be done near term to accelerate an opportunity to augment our efforts on tackling really decades of infrastructure underinvestment that accumulate over time. So briefly to outline these, there will not be a PowerPoint presentation, just to outline the various ideas that have been introduced. One is what we talked about earlier tonight, the emphasis on sourcing grants. We've had a pretty good track record of sourcing grants in the last couple of years. We currently are experiencing some capacity challenges just given the impact of the fires and the COVID emergency and the opportunities that come from that on the grant front. So we are looking to recommend and have incorporated it with your direction tonight, some additional resources to augment some support in this area to really look for funds that can help us, particularly with some of these capital projects. The Cornella Pump Station is another good example of a shovel-ready project that is ready to go when resources are available. Some of this work can also be done through volunteers. So if we have some grant experts in our community that would like to offer some help, we're open to that and we're ready to talk to you. Let me move into some bigger ideas and some fairly significant challenging opportunities. One would be to consider some form of a general obligation bond. These are resources that could be applied to the general fund or any of our enterprise funds, so it could tackle any of the topics that we've talked about tonight. The city has successfully used this approach in the past. The city's Station 17, our fire station, was built via a general obligation bond. These bonds do require a 2/3 vote of support from our voters. They can be flexible in the amount, the term, and the types of projects, as I mentioned. But it requires a general obligation bond applies a tax to properties within the city, both on the residential side, commercial side, and the term on the fire station bond was 20 years. The third item discussed in the staff report is related to a real property transfer tax. It's referenced as a tiered increase. That is an approach that cities have used recently. So this would be essentially a graduated adjustment to what is we're a general law city under the state of California, which means that we do receive real property transfer tax revenues. They're calculated at 55 cents per $1,000 of valuation. Charter cities in California, and a general law city is required to go through an election to become a charter city. A charter city can adjust that real property transfer tax rate. In some cities, there are ranges, whether it's double, triple, or significantly higher. This city did look at this about 6 years ago as options, modeled what would be essentially a 1% real property transfer tax at the time of transaction, calculated that would produce approximately $1.5 million of revenue. These are 2014-15 numbers. The range is really doubling that 55 cents to $1.10 yields approximately $100,000, and every increment upwards to that 1% yields up to about $2 million. So that's one option. One of the challenges with a real property transfer tax, again, this is a 2/3 vote threshold. It also is likely to be a little more volatile than other types of tax methodologies because sometimes larger properties will sell. Sometimes in recessions, the property values will decline or the sales will decline. That will have an impact on the stability of those revenues, those types of revenues. Another option is similar to a Measure D or a Measure T. Measure D is the city's half-cent sales tax for general purposes. That requires a 50% plus one vote, a majority vote. Measure T is a countywide tax of a half-cent. It is a special tax, which requires a 2/3 vote, but it has to be used for dedicated specific purposes. So we know that our pre-COVID numbers for the city to to consider advancing a 1/2 cent sales tax. And we have capacity in the city of St. Helena for only one 1/2 cent. That's how much is left available to us. And I understand that there are competing concepts up and down the valley that would potentially dilute the city's ability to pursue a 1/2 cent sales tax. But the proceeds, half of the proceeds, really more than half of the proceeds, our sales tax consultant says that approximately 60% of our sales tax is produced by visitors to the city. These sales taxes can also be either ongoing or set to a term of whatever length that the city would like. Finally, this has been talked about earlier tonight, the concept of leasing or sale of underutilized city property. The building I'm in right now, 1572 Railroad, this is a building that the city was leasing just a couple of years ago. The revenue off of this building essentially equated to our ability to fund an additional position within the city. A good candidate for leasing or possible sale might be the Carnegie Library. We do use it for recreational programming today. It's a nice building to have. It is underutilized and could be generating additional revenue. And as we consider a transition to, as we plan the transition to the Napa Valley College, we've talked about the opportunities that come with freeing up the parcel at 1572 Railroad, as well as the City Hall parcel at 1480 Main Street. And we haven't really had conversations yet on what the opportunities, what the council's perspective is on opportunities that might come subsequent to that move. I will close by emphasizing that if there is any ballot measure of interest, it's my recommendation, a strong recommendation, that we conduct opinion research with our community. We want to develop a measure that would be a community-supported funding strategy or some other concept. So with that, let me pause. I want to emphasize that this is a beginning of a conversation. There is another report on tonight's agenda that speaks to the timing associated with both a June 22nd, June 22 ballot measure or a November 22 ballot measure. Essentially, that there's time between now and December for June and now in April for November if we're looking at a near-term election.
Thank you, Mr. Prestwich. Can you just go back to your last sentence in terms of timing regarding June or November?
Sure. So if we're looking at a June 22 election, that's going to be the primary election next year, the city would have to adopt an ordinance subject to voter approval and complete that work by December of 2021. So that's about 6 months from now. And in terms of a November ballot, that timeline extends into April and probably a little bit beyond.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So I'll bring it back to the council now. We'll start with the council. Is there any initial input or comments on the list here? Seeing no one, I'll jump in with a few thoughts and then we can see where that goes and then open it to public comment. I am certainly in favor of looking at what a ballot measure might look like. I think there's a appetite in the community certainly for something like that. I do like the idea of being aggressive on bonds. On grants. I think that that's something that we can work on at the same time as looking at a ballot measure. I think that looking at, I'm certainly in favor of the idea of looking at leasing city properties, perhaps in terms of housing opportunities as well. Maybe there's a synergy there in combining some of our goals together. So then it would be, really looking at, in terms of a ballot measure, what it might be. And I guess the question I have for Mr. Prestwich at this point, in terms of reaching out to the community, would it be something that we as a council would sort of determine which of the ballot measures we might be interested in, whether the GO bond, property tax, or the increased sales tax, And then once we did that, go out to the community for some direction on how to be specific with what we've chosen? Or would we go out with these 3 different ideas to get input?
I think we would want to work on narrowing the focus of what we think are the opportunities. Now, some of that is going to come from the polling. It would be my recommendation that we start with a conversation with a professional opinion research company. That cost is going to be in the $35,000 range for something like this, and it would be helpful to work with the council on developing a series of questions that would help the council and the community focus on what is something that would be community supported, that addresses successfully some of the challenges that we know we have from a funding perspective. So I would recommend as a starting point that we start with a conversation with a professional opinion research firm that can help us speak to that question, Mr. Mayor, because I think that the guidance may influence and a look at our challenges from their perspective may influence the approach a bit.
Thank you. And in terms of the range on the GO bond, we could determine that where we want that to land.
Yes, that is a number, depending on how that is looked at, that can be a number that is variable. It doesn't have to be up to a certain amount. You have a lot of flexibility with what number you set. Essentially, you would have a work plan that's tied to the number. So the work plan would identify the work, just as in the prior example with the fire station, there was a single project. We had a cost estimate on what that project would be, and the bond essentially paid for the full cost of that project. So similarly, with respect to a GO bond, a general obligation bond, there would be a series of a cost estimate for a project or more than one project, probably too challenging to take on too many items under a general obligation bond, but a project or projects and a budget, and then that bond amount would be tied to the cost of that project in order to fund its entirety.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. And Mark and April, thanks for all the work tonight and all of this background. I just wanted to comment. I was just thinking you actually answered one of my questions, which was with regard to the general obligation bond. I think we would have more success, and I think it would be clearer to the community if we just had a single project that we were going after. And I think to be effective that way, we would actually need something probably designed and a site selected, whatever the project is. And we would need to get that work done right now so we could communicate that mission to the community at large. So whatever we settle on, I think the fewer items that are included in that GO bond, the better. Obviously, I think all of us would like to say, let's just make this an open-ended sort of checkbook that we can keep on the shelf and tear pages from as we need it. But I don't think that will fly anywhere, and I don't think it's the way to do that. One other comment with regard to leasing underutilized city buildings. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was going to be my comment a few minutes ago, was just you bet. We've got Carnegie, we've got Railroad. Maybe there's something someplace else. I was thinking the school does such a good job, and they have a high waiting list. Maybe they can lease space from us to add additional classrooms and bring some of those other folks in who are on that waiting list today. I'm trying to think what else. The other thing that's not on the list here is getting our water rate study underway ASAP. I know it's on the work list for 18 months from now or so, or a year from now. I know it's a it's a big bruising effort to get that engaged and going. But I think it's so important because so much of the effort here is on the water and wastewater treatment side of things. So I think we need that study underway sooner rather than later. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring, then Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you, Mayor. With respect to the water rate study, I totally agree with that. We need to move forward on that. You know, the analysis of the tiered rate, the ability to do tiered rates sort of dropped off a cliff, unfortunately and sadly. That we need to revive that. So it's going to take a little bit more time to get a good study in place. So I think we should start that sooner rather than later. Just a point of clarification on the transfer tax, the real estate transfer tax. I'm pretty certain that that is actually a majority vote. In fact, the Emeryville model, it passed 59%, and it's 50. It looks like a 50+1 requirement, and is the same kind of a model that we would use. Now, transfer taxes are fraught with a lot of other issues, frankly, especially probably opposition from the real estate community. But one thing that I would note is there are going to be a lot more sales in general in California just by virtue of Proposition 19, which has totally changed the climate of real estate and estate planning. So I think you're going to see a lot more sales. I'm not necessarily promoting a transfer or a charter and a transfer tax, but I did want to make those points. Then I do agree generally that if we're going to do a geo bond, we should do some polling and we should target maybe one or two big ticket items rather than having a lot of different items. One of the things I philosophically have hesitation on is using these kinds of bonds for the enterprise funds. And here's why. So parcels inside the city are taxed, but there's a huge benefit to those outside of the city in terms of water and wastewater and anything else and any other, the enterprise funds, essentially. They don't get the tax, they get the benefit. So in terms of equity, I'm troubled by that. I mean, I'm troubled by the fact that anytime you put a tax on property, you raise the price of property and you make it less available. We have an affordable housing issue. So there's all these philosophical issues, but I do agree if we're going to do one, we should go forward with a more limited target of what we want to do, whether it's storm drains, or whatever. So those are some of the points that I would offer at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Councilmember Chateau.
Thank you. I'm just wanting to put some organization around the conversation because I see it. There's two different buckets where there's the capital improvement need that we have that's major. And I agree with the idea of, making it concrete and picking what we want to put in there. And then there's the increased ongoing expenses that I see is different and also needs revenue. We need it in both areas and they could be different sources. So I would want to spend the money to have the opinion research. I think we need it to make good decisions about what our voters will have an appetite for and what is possible. I'd also want to work in a question there about having that second hotel. That's a difficult one, but there's many different possible locations we've heard over the years. And that'll be important to voters to be able to understand, especially for the ongoing expenses. And we have it in our financial forecast. So let's talk about how we could get information on that to make that more real with all the different locations. And then the other point I wanted to bring up is just that as we're looking at the capital expenses, we want to keep in mind about the college lease and having that conversation. Is that long-term or short-term for our city hall needs?
Thank you. I have a few comments. I'm certainly supportive of the water rate study moving forward sooner rather than later. I think revisiting that is important. There's one other consideration with water that I think is worth talking about, and it goes back to the LAFCO recommendation, the Local Agency Formation Commission recommendation to consider a countywide water administration as they've moved to in Marin County and other counties. There may be, in a discussion like this, a way of finding economies of scale in tying in throughout our water administrations throughout the county. And that may give us the ability to address some of these deficiencies with, as I said, a larger economy of scale, a larger administration. So it may be worth looking at Marin and the transition that they made and where those benefits may have come in terms of, we have a small city, a small amount of people supporting a very large enterprise, or a relatively large water enterprise. Is there a value in looking at tying in countywide or with some of the other municipalities, if not fully countywide? That may be something that helps us look at our water system deficiencies. And on a general obligation bond, the school, the high school had some success with the bond that addressed a number of different aspects that had sort of fallen behind. I agree that we don't want to get too broad and all over the place, but I do think that looking at a list of projects that we could, it might help bring different aspects of the community on board to support. If we're looking for a 2/3 vote, we may want to really understand what the community wants and see if we can get everybody to push, knowing that there's something that's going to satisfy what their section may want. So it may be worth learning some lessons from the school about how they sort of made that list of priorities and then were able to put it across the finish line. So with that, if there are, I'm not seeing any other council hands at the moment. And so with that, I'll open it to public comment and then come back to the council.
Okay, just one moment. Carlotta, you will be, you're allowed to speak. You can unmute yourself and address the council for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. This is Carlota Sainato, Program Coordinator with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. I just wanted to raise awareness to the fact that on street infrastructure in the staff report, the item only discusses the pavement condition, and there is no mention or measure regarding the bicyclist and pedestrian infrastructure on local roads. We understand that there is a very broad balance that is being considered in this discussion, but we really believe that we need to include creation and maintenance of multimodal streets in important financial considerations like this from the beginning to ensure that they're included in street projects, as this infrastructure will help us meet safety, health, and climate goals while also providing a larger return on investment. Additionally, we trust the city to identify and pursue appropriate funding sources for infrastructure. We would just like to mention that we've had a lot of experience with looking at active transportation grants, such as the active transportation program, that would be potentially fall under the grant pursual option. And we just want to advise that these grants are highly competitive and can be very difficult to secure. So we ask that the city consider supplementing any active transportation grant pursuits with other funding solutions. We appreciate the dedication and hard work you're all doing to address these infrastructure needs. So thank you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we seeing additional public comment?
Yes, there is additional public comment. Nancy, I'm going to allow you to speak. You can unmute yourself and address the council. You have 4 minutes.
Hi, good evening, council and staff. I'm wondering if there's some way to look into incentivizing or helping the entitlements that have already been issued. There's the 60 rooms that could go at Venland Station, and Down Hotel also has entitlements issued for 8 additional rooms. So I'm not sure why those things have not manifested, but it seems like if there's some way to contact the owners and see if there's some obstacles that the city could help them overcome. So those are 68 hotel rooms that already have entitlements issued that have not been built. And this is really exciting to hear all these great options, Manager Prestwich, that you are presenting. It's, I'm very encouraged. I think collectively there's a lot of brilliance amongst you, and slow and steady wins the race. So, you know, if you can figure out a way to prioritize the needs and then a responsible and methodological approach, we will get where we need to go. And lastly, I'd like to say I am certainly no expert about writing grants, although I have written a couple, and it's been like 30 or more years ago. But if you figure out what the criteria is for a volunteer, if there's anything I can do to help the city find money, I'm all in, and we delighted to help you with that. So seriously, if you put together what is the criteria for a volunteer, you've got one here. And that's it. Thanks so much, you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we see additional public comment?
I do not.
Okay, with that, we'll bring it back to the council. And I'm seeing Councilmember Hardy.
Sure, a few comments at this point. Then I support the city manager's recommendation that we look to polling for some guidance on what's feasible at the ballot. I think that's essential to making sound decisions about ballot measures. I also agree that you know, getting the questions right is really important, and where council members, I think, potentially have a useful role to play is really contributing their knowledge of the community to the framing of the questions. I just want to add that I don't think that's a process that works very well, you know, with all five of us at a city council meeting. So I think that is something where the task should be delegated to two council members to work on, and I'm not volunteering. And finally, as much as I'm intrigued by the possibility of a transfer tax, I don't think, given the mix of things that we have going on and our needs and our options, that taking on charter city status is the right thing for us to do at this time. It's not that I'm opposed to it categorically, I'm not at all. But we have an awful lot on our plates as it is. So my suggestion to the council would be that we not pursue that at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that brings up a very important point about the transfer tax, that it would require moving into a charter city aspect. And so I support Councilmember Hardy on if we're going to narrow this list down. To me, that's a factor that doesn't wouldn't stop us from thinking about it in the long term. But I think for right now, that's an extra step that would make this difficult. So I would support the idea that that might not be the way to go right now, if we're narrowing this list down. I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Yeah, thank you for all the comments. Very interesting comments so far. You know, I just want to add that I don't often agree. Sometimes I agree with Nancy, but I think she makes a good point on the going back to some of our hotels, our smaller hotels, our inns. You know, Vinland Vista our Vineland Station is a total different animal, but there are a number of smaller projects where we could maybe, you know, ask owners, could you, you know, are you interested in getting 8 to 10 more units? And you do that throughout the town, and it's relatively low impact. But, you know, if you get 8, 10, 5 here and there, all of a sudden it starts adding up to 50 or 60 potentially. It's something I talked about in 2015, and that council was interested in that approach also. And so it seems, I know it's not on the list and it may divert our attention, but maybe it's time to revisit, maybe an outreach to some of our hotels to see if there's any interest there, because I think that could be very fruitful and a lot less impactful, or, in terms of the environmental issues that we are often confronted with. So for what it's worth, thank you, Nancy, for that comment.
I also support that idea. There's some opportunity already there that we can help sort of foster along. It's well worth looking at. Again, wanting to be considerate of staff and staff time in our work plan, but there may be something there in terms of fostering those ideas. And did I see Councilmember Hall with a hand? Okay, sorry. So if we bring it back now, looking at where we are, getting direction. So the city manager, I think you've heard that there's appetite for looking at some consultation to think about moving forward on ballot measures. If looking at properties, would there be an inventory that could be brought? How does that conversation come forward? Another step in terms of looking at our properties.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that is one that it's on a separate track than any form of a ballot measure. So I think we probably should have a conversation separate about following through on that. If there's any interest in a near-term opportunity with either a lease or sale, but I think the transition to Napa Valley College drives that conversation, and Carnegie can be thrown into that mix pretty easily. So I've anticipated bringing you that type of a conversation relatively soon anyhow. So why don't I plan to work with our staff at bringing you forward maybe a workshop that we can talk about some of these properties and not be under a time constraint with additional agenda items, and really have a long conversation about reuse of those properties and how we'd like to see them move forward. Would that be an approach that works for council members if that came forward in some form of a workshop?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be very valuable.
I think that's important, especially as it relates to our evolving, our housing update and housing in general. We can't really divorce the use of these properties from the need to build more housing. So that sort of has to be brought into the mix of the conversation.
Okay, that's very helpful. And in terms of direction moving forward, it's my understanding there's council support for the staff to work on receiving some proposals for opinion research, working through those and bringing you a recommendation to work with a firm. Okay.
Also, I just don't want to lose sight of water rate study.
I'm going to add this to my notes here. And just a brief update on status there. We brought you in mid-2020 during the pandemic a status report on the plan, and we were at a drafting stage. So we received the final draft. COVID and the fires did impact our ability to spend time reviewing that. We'll have our new public works director, his lens on this as well. But we're basically finished with that. And once we always anticipated once we finish that work, that would become really the baseline for a subsequent conversation about rates. And so we're basically ready for that. What we'll need to do is make sure on the water budget that we appropriate enough money in the next year's budget to be sure we can fund that study.
Yep.
And have plans for that.
That would be water and wastewater, would it not?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. So, and then I just want to circle back on number one on the sourcing of grants. Do you need some direction there, or do you have a way to step forward?
No, we're ready to move forward. We do have we have had conversations with a small firm that we think could fit our needs and explored that. I think there may be a need down the road to augment that number if we see a number of opportunities. And so, given the number of opportunities, it may drive our cost up a little bit. But I think we're talking about projects that could be in excess of several $1 million of grant opportunities. So it will be a wise investment for us if we see opportunities for writing. And we'll be working with our new director of public works. We're also in motion on an assistant public works director position, and we'll be prepared to be conducting interviews for that position shortly as well.
Okay, very good. So barring further comment, I think staff's got what they need. So shall we move on now to item, this is 12.2, and this is mayor and city council members' review of outside and internal ad hoc assignments. And this is our city clerk, Ms. Jafopoulos.
I believe City Manager Prestwich was going to report on this item.
Okay.
And I will share my screen.
Bringing it up myself right now live. So this is an item that comes at the request of Councilmember Hardy to bring this conversation forward today. And what our city clerk has done is inventory all of the various formal assignments as well as ad hoc and other assignments that the council is involved in. And clearly our council's has a lot of work on their plate. And so this is really an opportunity for us to react to what we see here, how it's laid out. And I think at this point, it would be appropriate for me to turn it over to Councilmember Hardy to provide some comments on what you were thinking about with respect to the request, as well as what you see here.
Thank you. What motivated my request that this be placed on an agenda was an ever increasing sense of the number of urgent tasks in front of us collectively, and by that I mean engaging and involving staff and council, and the fact that everyone's time is limited, and that really different resources, different skills and experiences come up in connection with different subject matters. So really, I was coming at it initially from a very personal sense that I have to focus my efforts because I have to manage my time in undertaking a meaningful contribution to the city through my role as a city council member. And without wishing to presume too much, it occurred to me that that might apply to other council members as well. And I'm concerned that in setting up these committees and taking on these tasks, that we recognize the importance of working with staff in ways that result in a situation in which the council member efforts are relieving, in some sense, the burden on staff rather than increasing it. That's easier said than done in some ways. Council members come to these subjects with lots of questions and requests for information that do add actual substantive burdens on staff time. But my belief is that if we articulate these concerns and get them out in the open and talk about them, it's much easier to address them and move forward than if no one says anything at all. So that is a concern of mine as well. And so what I notice in going through the list, and again, it's you know, I'm coming at this from a personal perspective. And I should also say that my concerns are really not related to the assignments that involve outside agencies. Those, maybe that's because I'm not being tasked with doing much there other than my appointment to the Groundwater Sustainability Plan Advisory Committee, which is very time consuming, but I just have that one thing outside that I'm working on. So I'm really focused on the internal assignments and consolidating and thinking about, you know, how to organize things and maybe considering some changes in assignments as well. So getting right to the heart of what's on my mind, I notice, and this is line item 20 in the staff list, we have consider and synthesize stakeholder housing recommendations, et cetera. That's Councilmember Hall and myself. But then also at line item 30, we have a housing element focus group ad hoc committee with Vice Mayor Doring assigned. My inclination, and I'll just throw this out for discussion, but when I look at that, I tend to think, well, those items are so closely related, we probably work more efficiently if that's one committee tackling, or at least, yeah, one committee tackling both things. In terms of council member assignment, I think the same council members logically would be working on both, but I'm not, you know, I'm not locked into that approach. I look at 26, 27, 28, and 29. We've got the same assignments there, Councilmember Chateau and Vice Mayor Doring. That looks, again, like, to me, like one committee with 4 different tasks enumerated. I don't know how you all are thinking about it, but everything we can do that simplifies things and really focuses and integrates our efforts, I think is desirable. I have a particular interest, longstanding, in getting our water supply management policies updated to reflect the realities of where we are in 2021 in terms of our understanding of climate change and its consequences, also in terms of our understanding of what our system can and can't do for us presently. So I've talked about a whole collection of things that I think need revisiting in past comments to the council. There's our safe yield analysis. There, you know, we are working with and through our water emergency regulations, but I think there's more work to do on that ordinance. Because that works together with the safe yield analysis in important ways. So I think the update needs to be integrated there. I think looking forward, we need an updated and more aggressive set of conservation standards and policies to apply both to residential and commercial projects. I see these things as all really part of one effort policy-wise, and related, but it might be useful or even important to treat it separately, is the quest for additional supply. So I'm asking for an assignment there so that I have another council member to work with on the policy updates and on ensuring that we have a kind of real-time, near-term dialogue with our largest water users, which are, I believe, all wineries, about what conservation measures look like, what they're doing, what they can do ongoing, and making sure that we're, and I know we've had a report today that on the commercial side, so far, it looks like the 10% goal is being met, and that's great. But again, I think we need to be learning from this experience what is being done and what can be done on the water conservation side, so that we can look towards making some of those changes permanent. It would be a huge benefit to the city if our overall demand were reduced by 10% ongoing. And having the wine industry experience that I have and related skills, I'd like to take that on. I'd like a partner in that. And then where that ties into the current committee structure is we have, it's line item 32, a water ad hoc committee with Mayor Ellsworth and Vice Mayor Doring. Unless I'm mistaken, that's a committee that exists at least in part because of the concerns about compliance with limits in water contracts, and that was a way of at least enabling some council members to look at actual water use. I think that would be enormously beneficial to anyone who is trying to understand where the opportunities for significant gains through water, through conservation measures are with our large users. It's a big ask, I know, but in effect, I'm asking to get a seat on that committee, make it, if you will, task it with additional tasks, and put all these things together, because I'm pretty sure from what I've learned just with a couple of phone calls that each of these large wineries operates in different ways. They've taken different steps and made different degrees of progress towards effective water conservation, and they also depend on city water in varying degrees in terms of what percentage of their total water needs are met by city water. So, you know, those are the things I wanted to bring up this evening, and so I will now be quiet and listen to my fellow council members.
I think this is a very valuable exercise, and getting this chart together helps us see the sort of the field and where everybody else is focused as well as ourselves. So there is a great value in having this document, and then recognizing, if we're looking at it, where we see efficiencies and overlap that we can combine and look for synergy, efficiency, et cetera. The water ad hoc committee really was formed under the idea of water security. And to me, that's the same as financial security. You look at every aspect. And so that was the idea of the water ad hoc committee, is that everything that relates to water can fall under that umbrella, to look at making sure we're making the best choices possible related to water. So that's the history of where that came from. and we can discuss as we go here how we move forward. Any other thoughts from the council at this point?
I think it's a good idea to have this put together too. So thank you, Lester, for suggesting it. I think there are some things here that, you know, frankly, I don't even know what they are. And in going through, you know, I had, I guess, a similar question on one thing I'm working on, which is number 31. I don't know the difference, if there's overlaps or congruencies, I guess, between 31 and 21, and what are those differences? So first, let me go back to Lester's quick comment. I think, Lester, your mission on the waterfront, I think, is a good one. And I think if there is data available through the Water Ad Hoc Committee, then I would definitely support somehow a review of looking at how you get access to that, because I think you would definitely need it if the plan is to have conversations with specific users. I think that would be very important. And I agree. It looks like other areas there are multiple tasks that are perhaps subsets of a single committee. And Lester, if nobody else volunteers, I'm happy to be your wingman on your on the water mission, all things encompassing, and looking at how do we, you know, the community is putting in a huge effort to conserve right now, and how do we help freeze some of that in place over time. So
that's just to put out that is, you know, where the vice mayor and I on that committee. So let's keep that conversation open a little bit in terms of how we fill that committee, because we already have something in place. So let's keep the dialogue tonight. We'll get back to the specifics, but if just in terms of general comments before we, you know, perhaps change assignments, that sort of thing, if that makes sense. I won't speak for the vice mayor, but that's a committee that I have a great interest in remaining on as well. So if we just start now with looking at maybe Councilmember Chateau has some input, and then we can kind of look back in terms of coming up if we want to decide if we're going to shift assignments.
I just was going to support having that goal of the 10% reduction on commercial users. I think that's a fantastic idea. I'm really excited about that. And so I wanted just to hear from the vice mayor and the mayor whether you were open to that on the committee, or it should be something separate, since we've had Councilmember Hardy and Hall offer.
I don't know if the vice mayor has any thoughts. It's certainly an effort that I've already been making as well in terms of conversations with users and trying to begin shaping that conversation. So, but we do want to be efficient with how we're moving forward. So let's have that conversation. So I don't know if the vice mayor has any thoughts at this point.
Well, I wish it was as simplistic as just supporting a 10% conservation reduction. I think it's much broader than that. Maybe the city manager can talk more about his sort of vision for that committee. But in any event, I am happy to step off that committee and allow, probably given that the mayor has expressed interest, allowing one of the other council members to replace me. I am not inclined to take on more duties in the housing area. I don't see those two as, I'm going to argue that they're totally different. The two housing initiatives, the focus group, and then the recommendations for properties. That's going to be a little daunting for me, frankly. I'm a little taxed. I know that sounds kind of wimpy, but I recognize the interest in water that you have, Councilmember Hardy. So I would defer to you as more of a, I mean, I think I have something to offer, but I think you have more to offer to our community on that issue, for sure.
And so with that, and I want to recognize Councilmember Hall and your interest in this too. It's going to be a group effort here as we get deeper into this. So I think there'll be a role for everybody in helping push for those goals, to meet them, exceed them. What I'm hoping is that as people get comfortable finding the efficiencies and hitting those goals, they find ways to find more efficiencies, and that we can be helpful in that effort. Helping get even further towards the goals.
Can I jump in with one other sort of side tangential remark? I was just thinking of our city clerk's ongoing valiant efforts to recruit for our other boards and commissions. Some of those, if we have 14 open positions, I think, is it lack of interest from the community, or have we defined those missions, or have we outlived the original missions? I know that we've talked about rechartering the ATSC and Parks and Rec, and anyway, maybe as we're thinking about these assignments, there's a way that we can, to Member Hardy's earlier comments, a way to help provide some relief to staff and actually do some work that will help staff instead of overwhelm them from hitting them with so many angles. If we're not adding value in these places, let's clean them up.
Seeing Vice Mayor Doring.
Just briefly, I also want to recognize that Council Member Chateau serves on a committee, the Water Advisory Board Committee, which I don't think that's listed here. Maybe I missed it. I'm not suggesting any change there, but I wanted to recognize that that's a lot of work for you, especially in the next couple of months. It may slow down, but that's a tremendous amount of work on your part. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I do want to recognize Vice Mayor Doring does have a lot to add in the water conversation. He has a remarkable ability to look at balances in any area. So I do want to recognize that, and looking forward to working with Councilmember Hardy. I think this is going to be, as we went into the pandemic, we all had to work together to get through a challenging situation, and we're going to have to do it again with this. So appreciate it. And then with this list now, this document, I think that's going to allow us to continue revisiting and looking at where we need to put energy, and as also looking at our committees, how we make those effective and fill those positions and in a meaningful way, so that folks feel that when community members participate, there's a value in doing so. Mr. Hardy or Councilmember Hardy, does that give us a place of satisfaction with this item tonight?
Well, if we are taking an action that reflects the conversation that I've had essentially with Vice Mayor Doring here with respect to some change in the water committee, then yes, that's enough for tonight from my perspective. I hope that everyone will continue to think about how their skills and interests can most efficiently and effectively be deployed to move the ball forward in ways that support and enhance the ability of our staff to do what they do. And I think, on some of these subjects where the outcomes involve, in the end, public policy decisions that have to be made by council, that synergy is potential is there. And with respect to our water supply management policies, that's I'm all about making that happen as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Thank you. And I'm seeing Vice Mayor Doring, then I think we have to make a vote.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure that Councilmember Hall did not take my appointing to Councilmember Hardy on that committee as some kind of an insult to you. You add value to water also, Councilmember Hall. You've already done that through a lot of the analysis that you've submitted. So I just want to make sure that was not my intent.
No, not.
Very good. Okay, I'm seeing Mr. Presswich.
It would be appropriate to receive public comment, and then I have some questions for clarification that I'll need a little direction on.
So I think we need a vote to go past 9 o'clock.
Yes, please.
I move that we take the meeting to 9:15.
A second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Hall,
Yes.
Shuto,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
No.
Mayor
And,
Ellsworth,
yes. And I'm seeing Mr. Walsh, our city attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to clarify if you are going to change the makeup of that committee, you should have a vote on that, a motion, a second, and a vote on that, so that we're clear that you're changing that. I didn't want to do it by consensus or anything.
I appreciate that. And so what I'll do now is open it to public comment and then come back to Mr. Presswich and we'll finish with a motion. Any public comment at this point?
I'm not seeing any public comment.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council. And Mr. Presswich, did you have a comment before I entertain a motion?
I do. With respect to all of the water items in particular, Councilmember Hardy referenced 4 different ideas that had essentially, the idea of grouping them all together. That included the safe yield analysis, water emergency ordinance, really the water phased emergency ordinance and revisiting that, new conservation standards and policies, and additional water supply. I have been coordinating with Councilmember Hall on water supply, and we're starting that conversation. And I have been working with the mayor and the vice mayor with respect to developing a water security framework, which has gone through an additional layer of review through our engineer and a consulting engineer. It's ready. It's getting close to being ready for a conversation with the council, which I hope to bring at our second meeting in July. So that is something that also could potentially fall under the same, if it's a water ad hoc that has a number of tasks, this could be included. We previously have talked a little bit about water agreements and potential to revisit those. And then this concept of some additional water efficiency goals that could be established. So I don't know if there's interest in bringing all of these under one essential umbrella with respect to what we would call a water ad hoc committee. But it would affect some of the conversations that I've had. It probably doesn't affect the water security plan so much as it affects the water supply conversation.
So I anticipated that might be the case, Mr. Presswich, and I think it makes sense to carve the water supply side out and leave the current conversation and efforts organized as they are at present.
Okay, and that was not a formal ad hoc working relationship with Mr. Hall. It's just that Mr. Hall has some teaching opportunities on top of a mountain with water, and we were capitalizing on his relationships with people. So
as we have that conversation about water supply, enhancing it, I think we do need, and maybe this is someplace that we structure it. I believe we all have dialogue with folks in terms of us looking for supply. So how do we do that in a way that's managed and structured so that when we're bringing those things forth, we sort of have a way of looking at it comprehensively. It's just something to think about as we look at a water security framework. This might not fit directly in what Councilmember Hardy and I are, this water security ad hoc committee. But at some point, we want to, it's just like with finances and money, you want to know all your sources, inflow, outflow, how it's all working. So I think we need to think a little bit about how that's structured.
Okay, and I have a couple more quick questions. Councilmember Hardy, I believe, referenced the potential for consolidation of 20 and 30. This was housing related items. I don't know if there's going to be interest in direction to consolidate those tonight. And then a reference to 25 through 29 seeming to be similar. And I don't know if there's an interest in consolidating those under one ad hoc, and essentially it's a youth. It's related to goal 2. Is it goal 2? No, it's goal 5.
Can I share my screen so we can
It's
go
goal
through them?
5. It's goal 5. So I don't know if the council wants to provide direction on those 2 items tonight or not, but happy to receive direction on that topic as well.
Any council comment here? Is it too much at this point in the meeting to try to synthesize these together? Is it better on something like this to give it a little bit of thought, how something like that could be brought in together? Any thought from council? I'm inclined to think that trying to put that together in the next 12 minutes is going to be challenging. And then we have one more item we want to get to. So is this something we can revisit in terms of looking at how that might shape up?
I think so. And so
I really just wanted to get the thoughts out for consideration. So I don't see any need to pursue those items further tonight.
if you would like to make a motion with respect to consolidating the water items, I can itemize each of the tasks for the council. If you would like to take formal action on that specific item.
Is there a motion on what we discussed earlier about the shift in the ad hoc committee?
Well, I could be wrong, Mr. Presswich, but I was thinking for tonight it would be enough simply to have the motion that reflects Vice Mayor Doring's generous offer to trade places so that I have a seat on that committee. But I think the conversation about the tasks is enough myself.
So is
That's
that
helpful.
a motion?
So sure, I'll make a motion. It's a little bit awkward when I'm in the middle of it, but I move that we accept Vice Mayor Doring's offer to step down and appoint me to the Water Ad Hoc Committee.
I'll second.
And a roll call, please.
Councilmember Hardy,
Yes.
Chateau,
Yes.
Hall,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Doring,
Yes, of course.
Mayor Ellsworth.
Yes. Okay, very good.
By the way, just on the housing issue, I know we don't have much time. It would be good to get some input from the planning director and the assistant planning director on sort of what they're looking for in terms of the focus group as opposed to the city properties. There may be some room there to have a discussion on that. I just would like to hear from them first because it affects the housing element update to a certain degree. So I'll just offer that. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. So with that, we will move to our final item, and this is 12.3 June 7, 2022 gubernatorial primary election and November 8, 2022 gubernatorial general election calendar discussion. And this is our city clerk, Cindy Shafopoulos.
And I will be brief. So I just want to let the council know if they are considering ballot measures, if there was interest for a June 7th primary election ballot measure, we would need to, well, actually, and City Manager Presswich already alluded that we needed to have all of our items in place by December. And if we wanted to place something on the November 8th general municipal election, we would need to conclude our items by April 2022. And this is a receive and file report. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. And I'm seeing a question from Councilmember Hardy.
Thank you. This is a quick comment. I think as to making a decision about which date looks better, I'd much prefer that we get the advice from the polling consultant that we've already talked about.
I think that's a good comment. I'm of course wanting to think about moving as quickly as we can, but I think we want to do it in as measured a way as possible. So I support the idea of looking to the advice from the experts. Mr. Presswich, did you have a comment?
I do, and this is something I should have caught when reviewing the staff report. But the November election, my past experience leads me to believe that we probably have a little bit more time than April. So I did mention April earlier because I was remembering the staff report, but reflecting on that, I think we have probably through July to finalize work. And so we can double check that with the county registrar of voters, but my thinking is we probably have a little bit more time with respect to the November election.
Thank you. I'm gonna, seeing no other council questions at the moment, I'm gonna open it for public comment just to see if there's a comment out there, and I'll look to the city clerk.
I see no hands raised.
Okay, I'll bring it back to the council. Any additional comments or questions on this item? Good to get the timeframes out there we'd be looking for, so thank you.
I just have one question. There's a reference in both of these items calling for a special election. Would it be a special election if you're, I know we don't typically have anything on the primary election, but we do on the general election. Would that be calling for a special election or just the normal election?
It would be a normal election for the primary, or I'm sorry, for the general. It would be a special for the primary.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So if without any other comment, that's the end of our meeting tonight. So we'll thank everybody. I really appreciate that. We're still at the working through the recovery phases of COVID. So stay focused on that. We'll stay focused on our emergency preparedness, our water conservation, and working together as a community. So thank everybody. Thank you all. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
Welcome aboard, Mr. Rincon. Thank you for being here.
That.
Very anticlimactic, but we do welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here.